This episode is sponsored by Moschio Prosecco. Want to sell sparklers and 187s? Moschio has them in Brut, Extra Dry, and Rosé. Look for the 12-bottle party pack.
For your age-worthy wines, for the Brunellos and the Barolos and the Bordeaux and Burgundies and high-end Cabernets and Shiraz from around the world, it's like, yeah, you need to have a more reliable closure. And that's where a lot of winemakers are starting to rely upon Screwcap, because now there's 40 plus years of evidence that Screwcaps will work and they will age. The data is there. People just aren't reading it. People, for whatever reason, are not paying attention to the fact the data makes sense.
This is Wine Biz 360, in-depth coverage of the wine industry. For wine professionals, by wine professionals. Here is your host, Joe Janisch.
So today our guest is Michael Meagher, Master Sommelier since 2015. His hospitality consulting company is Sommelier On Demand. He's worked with clients such as Treasury Wine Estates, Jackson Family Wines, Ruth's Chris, food festivals such as the ones in Boston and Nantucket and Newport, and many others. Michael has a bachelor's degree from Harvard University, an associate's degree from the Culinary Institute of America, holds a master's from the University of Adelaide in Australia, and it so happens that his master's thesis was a focus on screw-capped wines, which is going to come in handy today because we will be talking about screw caps and corks and alternative closures. So without further ado, Michael, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Joe. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you, and I'm just kind of happy that all of my studies in the past are somewhat still relevant now. A lot of times academia, when you study something, it becomes obsolete maybe a year or two later, but the debate on screw caps, while a lot of people want to put it to bed, and it's still alive and kicking. So it's kind of exciting to be able to see that since, I guess I wrote my master's thesis in 2006, that here we are 12 years later, and it's still as relevant as ever. Consumers are paying a little bit more attention, but it's still a very hot topic in the industry.
It is, and I really have to wonder if it's more of a consumer issue at this point, or if it's more of the gatekeepers, because I feel like especially the younger wine drinkers, they're fine with screw caps.
Yeah, and that was the interesting thing I found back in 2000, and when I was in Australia in 2005 and writing in 2006, a huge percentage of wines in Australia were under screw cap, and New Zealand had basically converted just about all of their wines to screw cap. And one of the big frustrations was that winemakers in Australia were being forced essentially to bottle some of their wines for export under cork closure to be sent to the United States. And my research found that it was mainly a gatekeeper issue. If you look in Australia, the consumers kind of went along with it because what do consumers really care about? Well, it's getting a good glass of wine. And Australian consumers trusted the Australian winemakers to do what was best for their wine because, well, they knew best. It was their wine. They'd raised these grapes. They had taken good care of them along every step in the way. And if they were going to do something to put an effective closure on it, then the consumer didn't really care. They just cared that they were getting good wine. So it still seems like there's a bit of a gatekeeper issue here in the United States. Although if you look at the percentage on the shelves now, it's far greater, at the premium categories than it was 10 years ago. So I think that's progress. I think that really is an indication that consumers are putting more trust into just people doing the right thing for their wine, for whether it's short-term or long-term cellaring and consumption.
Yeah, and now that you bring that up, why would screw cap be a better option versus cork? I mean, this is a big discussion, but maybe we should start with why would wines be under cork in the first place?
Sure. Well, we have to go back a couple hundred years to look at this quote new technology end quote. A cork closure was it was all the rage in the 1700s because we had changed. Essentially, connoisseurship was just starting to take off. We were just starting to move wine around the globe in a little bit more volume. So what we needed was more durable packaging, and we needed. Glass bottles were very fragile. A lot of times, glass was being made over wood burning fires. And these didn't burn nearly as hot as coal fires that were really starting to come into play in the 1700s. So the glass could be made much stronger over a coal fire than over a wood fire. Now with more durable glass, we needed something that could effectively seal it for these long journeys, whether it was by cart in Europe or by ship to the quote New World. So they found that stuffing a piece of bark, a relatively spongy, flexible piece of bark, into the neck of the bottle provide a very reliable closure. And this was, again, this was new technology back then. And it's, tradition has a very hard time of, kind of being given up in the wine industry. So it's stuck around for a while, and no one's really paid much attention to closures up until the 20th century, when we started seeing that through new winemaking and essentially sanitation techniques, chlorine was being used to clean a lot of wineries, and it was seen as not as pungent as sulfur. So they started using chlorine to clean out a lot of barrels and certainly cleaning corks. It also had the benefit of bleaching out corks and made them look a little bit more pale, less kind of brown and dirty. So you had chlorine now interacting with these corks, which had a little microorganism that basically, when it was exposed to any sort of chlorinated substance, gave off this horrible smell in very, very small but traceable doses. So all of a sudden, we realized that through the demand for, quote, cleaner corks, we were actually causing this fault to appear. And that's when we started to see the entry of Screwcaps into the world as an alternative. Because when you look at who was spending money on corks, most of them are produced in Portugal. So they were sending the best corks out to Bordeaux, to Burgundy, to northern Italy, to central Italy. When corks wound up being rejected and sent back to Portugal, then they went down essentially the food chain, and they started sending corks to the United States. In the United States, those corks that got rejected and then kind of went further afield. And Australia and New Zealand were the last on the list to get some of these corks. And Australian winemakers were just exhausted and frustrated, as well as the New Zealand winemakers, of receiving low-quality cork. So they decided that something had to be done, and they started to explore screwcap wines. And they really picked up on it in the 60s and 70s. It nearly bottomed out a couple of wine regions, especially the Clare Valley. But they persevered. They kept believing that this was the best thing to put their wine under. These weren't wines made for long-term cellaring. It was made for domestic consumption. It was relatively inexpensive wine, but they found it to be way more reliable than this really low-grade cork they were being shipped. So they made the push, and that's when the true debate really started, and the research really went into play, and with the Australian Wine Research Institute. And now it's like, well, they wanted to see, are these wines going to age differently? What really is it about cork that makes it a good closure? What is it about screwcaps that makes it a promising closure down the road? And it raised a whole bunch of other questions, which some are still being explored today, but a lot of the data is really supported that move to screwcap and alternative closure.
Right. A lot of people in the trade, I think they notice when a cork is a different size. You see some of the wines that are for early consumption, the corks might be a little shorter, but they probably don't realize that there are different grades of cork. And this is what you're talking about. Like there are actually different grades of cork. And
yeah, and then it comes down to, really, the wine industry is a series of financial decisions. We want to romanticize it. We want to believe that everything that goes into it is good and wholesome and produces that end effect of great wine. But it's a tremendous number of business decisions that have to be made. And do you want to pay top dollar or top euro for 55 millimeter high grade cork, which will cost you maybe $1.25, $1.50 per closure? Or do you want a shorter cork? Do you want a 45 or a 35 millimeter cork? Do you want an agglomerated cork? Do you want, again, huge number of decisions that go into this. And then it's like, well, when you get the shorter corks, you have greater opportunity for one flaw in that cork to adversely affect your wine, which is why usually the longer corks are more sought after and more expensive. But no one wants to make a decision that could, once the wine's out of your control, the winemaker spends so much time and effort in the winery, in the vineyard, working to make this best wine possible, that once it leaves the winery, then that's when the greatest amount of damage seems to happen to it, because you can't control what the cork is going to do. So that's when screwcaps really became competitive, is when you started to look beyond that 55 millimeter, getting shorter corks and seeing the failure rates of those compared to the A-grade corks. Now, all of a sudden, it became a lot easier to really convince people that an alternative closure might be the best way to go.
Right. And you talk about the effect of the wine after it leaves the winemaker. We've talked about this. Most of the people in the trade go right to TCA as the big, smelly, pungent thing, but it's a little more than that, because it's not just TCA that affects the wine. It's some other issues.
Yeah, absolutely. It's TCA, trichloroanisole. There's also something called TBA, which is tribromoanisole, which is also results in a number of faults. So there's two chemical compounds right off the bat that can give you that musty, moldy, wet basement, wet dog, however you like to express it, that flaw. But there's also seepage, there's oxidation. You look at cork, it is literally tree bark. And you just walk down the street and look at any tree. Are any two trees the same with regard to their bark? No, there's going to be natural differences. It's just how the tree grows. There's terroir, there's pores. And yes, cork is great because it's spongy and can compress, but when you compress cork, you might be creating a channel for oxygen. You might be causing the edges of the cork to compress in a way that wine can leak out or oxygen can seep in. A lot of people talk about how, a cork allows a wine to breathe. It's a bit of a kind of a false friend there in that, you need some oxygen for the aging process to happen, but just about all the oxygen you need is already dissolved in that bottle of wine.
Oh.
It's in the bottle already. You don't need a lot of oxygen.
Really?
Yeah, you don't need, and we're talking, yes, there is a very small amount of oxygen that can get through a cork. It's on the level of 1/10,000th of a milliliter of oxygen per day. So you think, it's next to nothing when you put it into context of what oxygen is already dissolved in the wine throughout the winemaking process, to kind of catalyze that aging process. Screw caps can be manufactured to give you that exact same oxygen ingress rate. The problem is that cork, because of its variability, because you never know what's on the inside of the cork, is there kind of a bit of a gap? Again, we can't take a cork apart without compromising its integrity. But cork can go from that 1/10,000th of a milliliter all the way to 1/10th of a milliliter. I mean, that's a huge range of variability in this natural product. And I was actually, I was speaking with Jeffrey Grossett the other day at a Wine Australia event out in Lake Tahoe, and he's a big proponent of screw caps, and he put it into a bell curve. And he said, we all know the bell curve, how it kind of starts out slow and then bumps up towards the middle and then kind of gradually goes out towards the other end. If you look at that is the range of cork, and then you look at what small sliver of that bell curve is, where that's our ideal kind of cork aging characteristic. And you can have every single screw cap produced fall into that very narrow range on that bell curve. You think about all the variability, all of the uncertainty that comes into play. And at that point, it's a no-brainer. Why would you ever choose something that allows 3, 4, 5 standard deviations from what's considered normal? Why would you accept that rate of failure where you could have something that never will deviate from that? Well, it's very, very, very rare for deviation in screw cap to happen because it is manufactured, it is controlled, and it does touch the bottle on a surface that can be manufactured and controlled. Whereas again, cork, you have no control over the internal construction of it. And also we can't manufacture the inside of the neck of the bottle. That's something that we can't machine that out to give it a pristine, smooth surface. There's usually some flaws that might happen in the neck of the bottle. Whereas at the lip of the bottle, we can actually control that a lot more cleanly and securely.
Right. Now you touched on letting some air in with the screw cap, the permeability. I guess there's different levels of permeability with the screw caps. I had never really heard before that you don't really even need the wine to breathe. So is this like a newer kind of thing that we're finding out based on the research from the years of using screw caps?
Yeah. That's the cool thing is we really have no idea what happens in a bottle of wine as it ages, because once we open that bottle, it changes the entire chemistry of it. It's next to impossible to observe a wine's aging process in real time and continue to see that evolution, which is why when you age screw cap up against cork, you have to put away cases of wine. So that way every year, every 6 months or whatever period you're using to assess the wines, you're relying upon consistency of the bottles that you put away. It has to come from different bottles. It can never come from the same bottle because you change the chemistry. I mean, it's really complex. And we're starting to understand that a lot of the oxygen that wine relies upon is already in the bottle. And that's why it's so critical for winemakers to have good, solid understanding of their winemaking process and to minimize risk factors. And that's why sulfur is, again, it's a bad word right now because a lot of people are scared of sulfites, but it does help with binding up some extra oxygen. It can scavenge and bind up some oxygen, which could prematurely age wine. So a lot of what takes place is already in the bottle, and it just needs that gentle period of time for these chemical reactions to take place. With too much oxygen, then your aging takes place too quickly and without a lot of control. And that's when bad things start to happen. We've all had that bottle of wine where we open it up and it smells really just kind of old and dried out. And we look at the label and go, this doesn't make any sense. And usually that's because of either too much oxygen in the bottle beforehand or too much oxygen getting in through the closure, whatever it might be. I mean, that can happen in screw caps too. If you ding right around the lip of the bottle, if you ding that screw cap, just kind of take it, if you take the back edge of a knife and just whack it, you can actually break that seal and allow more oxygen to come into play. So screw caps aren't without their own risks and faults for sure. But again, it's when you look at the consistency and you look at the levels of failure, it does seem to be a more acceptable kind of move for winemakers.
Right. And probably 95%, if not more, of wines that are purchased are consumed within a year or two or even a week.
Yeah.
Right. So
I think most people age their wines for about 45 minutes on the car ride home, depending upon traffic.
Exactly.
And then they crack it open. But yeah, and that's the other thing is so much of the wine is consumed immediately. So much of the wine is consumed, without requirement of aging, which is why, not just screw cap, but now you talk about those plastic corks or agglomerated corks. You talk about, again, technical cork. And that's fine if you're having a wine that you're going to drink within a year, just as long as it is relatively a competent closure, then it's not going to make that big of a difference. But yeah, for your age-worthy wines, for the Brunellos and the Barolos and the Bordeaux and Burgundies and high-end Cabernets and Shiraz from around the world, it's like, yeah, you need to have a more reliable closure. I mean, that's where, again, your high-quality corks are going to go, and also where a lot of winemakers are starting to rely upon screw cap, because now there's 40-plus years of evidence that screw caps will work and they will age, and they will age differently, but some people say they want their wines to age more slowly, and that screw caps allow their wines to age more slowly. And they love that evolutionary process because it's not, it takes longer to fall off the cliff, if you will. Some people taste the wine every year and all of a sudden the wine seems to have faded. Now you get a little extra time. You have to wait a little bit longer to get to that point. But once you get there, the plateau at the top seems to be a little bit more extended from what some of the research is showing.
Wow. Yeah. And from what I understand, that the winemakers can actually fine-tune the amount of oxygen that comes through with the screw caps, where if they think like it's a big vintage, maybe they let a little more air in, or if it's a wimpy vintage, for lack of a better term, maybe they close it up a little more. It's kind of an interesting thing.
That's the cool thing is so much thought goes into what style of wine am I going to be making, and what has nature given me, and what can I do this year. And again, every vintage is going to be different. And here we are, allowing a winemaker to really customize their closure based upon a vintage. I need a little bit more oxygen. This is going to be something that's so packed and powerful, and the tannins are massive, and I just want a little bit more oxygen to get through the closure, so that way the tannins soften up maybe a little bit earlier. I have plenty of fruit. I have plenty of acidity. Everything's great, except the tannins I just want them to resolve. That's really cool that we can allow a winemaker to customize that closure. That it's never been able to be done before. And when winemakers are now faced with another decision of how do you want the consumer to enjoy your wine? Do you want to have them lay the wine down for 10, 15 years before it's approachable? Or do you want to have an option that they can start drinking it in 5 and extend that window of drinkability from 5 to 25? And I think I'm not going to say it's for every winemaker, but I think it's something that's great for them to think about or even to consider. Some winemakers won't choose that route, but I think some winemakers appreciate that, just being given the opportunity. Right. Again, they're trying to make the best wine they can. No winemaker I know is trying to make a faulty, flawed wine at any level. They're trying to do the best they can with what they've been given.
Yeah. It's ironic that it's more than acceptable now for these younger wines or wines that'll be consumed immediately to be under screw cap. But what it sounds like is that we really want to be aging wines under screw cap, from what you're saying.
Yeah, again, it's so much of a personal decision. Some winemakers just love the way that their wines behave under cork, and I'm not going to say that's wrong. Again, every winemaker is making the decisions for their winery, their image, their consumer base. They're not making these decisions in a vacuum. I've had wines age under screw cap and under cork side by side, and it's fascinating to see the difference. Some wines I prefer actually under cork, I find, at a certain period of time. But then 10 years later, I might prefer it under screw cap. It's great because it makes you think a little bit more. It really, kind of gets you out of your comfort zone, and you start to realize, wow, there's some really good wines here. So again, it's not that it's better. It's just that it's different, and it's another opportunity. I'm never going to say that screw caps are, as a whole, better. it's different, and I think it's more reliable. And I do think that there's a tremendous upside to screw caps that have to be acknowledged.
Right. Talk to me about the people who say that you don't want wine under screw cap because of the effect called reduction.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So reduction is when there's not enough oxygen, and then you have basically sulfuric compounds reducing down to hydrogen sulfide, which then gives you this kind of rotten egg, burnt matchstick aroma, which in some cases can blow off. If you kind of swirl around the glass, sometimes reduction can blow off, but sometimes it becomes a fixed component of the wine, and then in my opinion, renders it undrinkable. And again, this comes back down to winemakers doing their due diligence in the labs and making sure that there is enough of a balance in their wine of oxygen and sulfur dioxide. So that way, again, this is why they go to an enology school, to learn all this chemistry and science behind it. And sadly, my degrees have very little science background. So, just understanding that process is huge, because if you add too much sulfur dioxide and then you put a screw cap on it, and you're not going to get that oxygen ingress rate that you might get from, say, a lower grade closure or even a synthetic plastic cork, you're going to start to get these reduced aromas and flavors, and it's just not pleasant. So it requires a little bit more of a meticulous hand in the winery. You got to pay a lot closer attention. But yeah, it can be a problem. I'm not going to say it's because of laziness, it might be a miscalculation. There are a number of reasons why sulfur can become a problem under screw caps. But that being said, it's also a problem under the best corks. If you're going to look at apples to apples, those 55 millimeter corks, if you have sulfur issues under a screw cap, you're also going to have sulfur issues under those 55 millimeter corks, because they're going to behave pretty similarly in the bottle once it's packaged up.
Interesting. I just had the issue about a week ago. I had a special night. I had 2 bottles that I had been saving for a while, and I had one and I had my backup just in case one was corked. So I open up the one. Of course, it's corked. I'm like, all right, no problem. I got my backup. I'm feeling good. Open up the second one. What do you know? That one's corked too. And I'm like, now what?
Yeah,
right?
That's when you run down to the corner store and buy a lottery ticket, because that's a pretty rare occurrence, but it can happen. Yeah, and that's super depressing. When I worked in restaurants, one of the worst things I could ever possibly encounter on the floor was not a flawed bottle of wine when I'm opening it, or when I pour it and the guest says this is off, and I confirm absolutely there's something wrong with this wine. But it's when the table gets up to leave and there's still some half finished wine glasses, and there's a little wine left in the bottle, and you pour yourself a small amount, and there's something weird about it. There's something just not right about that bottle of wine. It's just not what it should be. There's something off about it, but it's not an identifiable flaw. It's just the fruit's gone. It's just a little too bland and muted, and you realize that there's something in that bottle that just didn't provide that experience for the guests. And they're going to walk out, and they didn't get to enjoy the evening as much as they hoped they would, because the wine wasn't great as they thought it should be. And I had maybe recommended that bottle of wine and said, oh, it's fantastic. They're going to maybe tell their friends, or they're going to go out and they're never going to buy that wine again. They're never going to trust that producer, because it just wasn't that good of a wine. That's the dangerous end of the kind of the TCA spectrum, not the obviously flawed end, but the just flawed enough that it starts to affect the flavor of wine. And the worst thing about this is it's at a level, it's about 1 teaspoonful per Olympic-sized swimming pool. So we're talking on the order of parts per trillion. Really, I mean, it's it can be detectable at I think it's 3 parts per trillion, which is nothing. I mean, that can affect a bottle of wine's flavor. It can affect how you enjoy that wine. It might make it seem a little too earthy and funky and just off. So it's a dangerous thing. And again, while it's terrible that those 2 bottles that for your special occasion that they weren't up to par. They were flawed, but I'm happy they were obviously flawed, and you could come up with a plan C at that point. So rather than just kind of essentially suffering through a bottle of wine, which is not at all the point of why that winemaker made that wine.
Yeah, it's the exact opposite of why we're in this business, right? Yeah. And it's true. Like most consumers, forget about consumers. Most people in the trade probably don't even realize that there's something other than full-blown TCA effect. I mean, I remember I was in the wine business at least 10 or 15 years when I was at a tasting with a very prominent winemaker, and he was like, I said, there's something wrong with this wine. It doesn't taste like it's supposed to. And he just took a sniff and he said something like tannin something or whatever from the cork. I didn't really understand because he didn't speak really good English.
Sure.
And then he kind of explained to me what you were just talking about, which is like, it's not just that full-blown TCA. It could be something just a little bit that just makes it. And that's the worst thing that can happen, because like you said, that person will never go back to that bottle or that brand again.
Yeah, and it might not go back to your restaurant. They might not trust you as a sommelier or as a retail shop professional. There's so many adverse effects of just this scalping of flavors, if you will, that can take place. And yeah, it's kind of scary to think about that, because it's such a personal thing, and we rely upon our guests to give us feedback. But there's this inherent kind of fear of saying there's something wrong with this. I don't really like this. This just doesn't taste right. Because again, it's subjective. Someone else might think, oh, this is fine. And they're not susceptible to some of those low level effects of TCA. They can kind of taste through it, if you will. But because it's so personal, because it affects everyone so differently, and there are some people who can't even get in the same room as a wine with TCA. And then some people can have a glass and it's badly flawed, but it doesn't affect them. It's such a personal thing that, again, we got to be careful. And we got to, obviously we can't eliminate all of it. They're working on it. And I think the levels of TCA are down to somewhere in the neighborhood of 2%. But then you factor in all the other things that, again, kind of the scalping, the oxidation, the TBA, other kind of biological things that might be taking place. And it's, sometimes informal studies, informal kind of tastings have indicated up to 7 or 8%. And that's, wow. that's really high. You think about if we were going to go out and buy a car or, an iPhone or whatever you want, whatever your purchase might be, and you weren't allowed to test drive it. You weren't allowed to take it out of the package. You weren't allowed to do anything except buy it. And then as soon as the transaction was complete and you've committed to it, then 7 or 8% of the cars on the lot, or 7% of the iPhones or coffee makers aren't going to work properly. They might give you coffee. They might allow you to make a phone call on the iPhone, but then you can't use the text feature. You have front wheel drive, but you're supposed to have 4-wheel drive. There's something wrong with it. Not just the car won't start or the iPhone won't work. Just something about it's off. We wouldn't accept that. We'd take that back in 30 minutes. We'd be back at the store complaining. But yet with wine, it's like, well, I guess I just have to accept the fact that it's just not my thing. It must be me. But so I'll just avoid this wine because it's just not, it's just not for me. It's a unique thing in our industry, is that we accept failure at such a higher rate than just about any other industry in the world. With maybe baseball, because then you strike out, how many times it's, batting averages are 300, and that's pretty good. But yeah, it's along that same line of, failure is, more common than I think it should be. And every effort to eliminate failure, and to eliminate bad experiences, and to eliminate, at the end of it, even some mistrust is a good thing. And I think, again, alternative closures are something that can help alleviate that. Right.
And so the people have come around in Australia and New Zealand. They're starting to come around in other areas. The United States, like I said, I think the younger consumers are fine and prefer a Screwcap. I can tell you that any bartender who's pouring wine by the glass definitely prefers a Screwcap. They don't want to be messing around with a corkscrew.
Absolutely.
So what can we do to kind of help people, the gatekeepers specifically, understand that, maybe Screwcap isn't absolutely perfect in every situation, but how do we get beyond, like, there's that romance of opening the cork. You're a master sommelier. Where's the romance when you present the Screwcap? How can we work around this?
Yeah, and again, putting on my sommelier hat, it's like, I want to be at the table side, and I want to be seen as someone who is adding to the experience, adding to this kind of pomp and
the drama,
the anticipation of it. And yeah, there's something very unromantic about the snap of the Screwcap being open. But, there are ways to, I don't want to say distract from that, but I think part of it is professionals having the knowledge of why a Screwcap is on the bottle. Again, people ask questions like, oh, do Screwcaps work? And again, I was at this Wine Australia event, and they avoided the subject altogether because they're like, the data is there. People just aren't reading it. People, for whatever reason, are not paying attention to the fact that data makes sense. So there's frustration on that end that maybe sommeliers were not paying close enough attention. We want to pay attention to the cool stuff, all the wine regions that are popping up and winemakers and the sexy stories and the grape varieties that we've never heard of. And there's less motivation to pay attention to the science and the data of closures. But I think as a professional, it's something we need to understand. We need to pay attention to all aspects of the wine industry. The business of the sommelier is very important, not just in terms of knowing how to run a program and how to run a profitable program, because that's your first responsibility, but also knowing the winemaking, knowing why things take place. It's not enough for us just to know what. It's important that we know why. Why are certain rules in place? Why are certain regulations in place? Why are certain grape varietals used in some regions and not in others? Why are these rules that have been in place for hundreds of years? Why are they relevant still today? Why? Again, we need to know why. A lot of it is because some sommeliers are just getting into it and they just haven't had time to dig into that because there's so many other things to pay attention to. But I find the more seasoned sommeliers that are out there, the people who have been in the industry, like myself for 10, 20 years, have had enough time to really wrap their minds around and go, yeah, this absolutely. I find that actually it's kind of the younger drinkers and the older sommeliers tend to have that kind of screwcaps are okay. And it's the younger sommeliers and the older drinkers that tend to be a little bit focused on cork closures. So it's kind of interesting. I mean, that's just more of an anecdotal thing than actual data. But I love the fact millennials are being more experimental. Right now, everyone is an expert because they have an iPhone or a smartphone of some sort, and they can look up regions and things like that quickly. And they put more trust into sommeliers for the really subjective stuff. The objective stuff they can get online, but it's the personal preferences and those relationships that they can build are far more important. And they just want to drink cool wine, and that's great. And whereas the older generation's a little bit more about, well, screwcaps are a new thing. Screwcaps are, they've only really, again, been around since the 60s and 70s. And for most of that time, they were on, bottles of booze and low quality wines. So it's tough to overcome, almost a lifetime of experience in wine because, again, we never want to be seen as the person in the room that knows the least amount about what's in our glass. So there is a bit of an adherence to what we know, especially when there's something so radical and new, quote, new, taking place on our bottle. So I think it's, again, something it's an evolutionary process. 400 years from now, they might look back and go, wow, screwcaps, man, that's interesting. But now we got something new that's even better. So it's a constant evolution. And we have, 5,000, 6,000 years of wine history in this world. It's constantly changing from amphora to barrel to bottle to now we have canned wine and boxed wine and things like that are, getting better and better. So who knows? Bottles are becoming a big problem now in the industry.
Right.
Not to get on a tangent, but when you look at the recycling of glass, glass is almost useless as a recycled material because of the different colors, because you'll have organic material mixed in, which then makes the glass less stable. Glass is a terribly problematic substance, especially when you consider how much it weighs.
Right.
So do we want to talk about the environmental impact? I think corks and screwcaps both are positive things. Corks are sustainable. They are, they don't kill off the tree. You can peel the bark off every 9 years and come back 9 years later and get more cork off of it. Screwcaps are made of aluminum. Aluminum is pretty recyclable. It's a fairly easy to reuse substance, but now glass bottles are becoming, and for a while, as the heavier the bottle you use, the more prestigious your wine was supposed to be. Now it costs, shipping costs and carbon footprints and recyclability are a big issue. So we talk about those wines that should be consumed within a year of bottling. Maybe we start looking at things like PET plastics. Certainly aluminum cans are becoming more popular. I love the idea of having aluminum cans of wine for, going on a hiking trip or a camping trip, pack in, pack out kind of stuff. It's great. Right. I think it's, diversity is a good thing in our industry, and glass bottles are, I think, going to be the next debate. I'm not going to say closures are going to be closed. The book will be closed on that anytime soon. But I think we're going to start to look beyond just about closures. And now we're going to start looking at alternative packaging as well as something for the next 10, 20 years as being the new hot topic.
Yeah. You know what? I think maybe we'll have to have you back and talk about alternative packaging at some point.
Absolutely.
That would be an interesting discussion.
It absolutely is. That's the fun part about our industry is once you think you know it all, here's a whole nother avenue that opens up that will change overnight.
Yeah, it's funny. When I started to learn about wine, I always thought, okay, the more I learn about wine, the more I learn that I know nothing.
That's it. The more I know about the wine, the more I just want to drink the wine
exactly.
and be happy drinking it as opposed to learning about
Exactly.
it. But that's half the fun, I guess.
All right, let me just put you on the spot. Let's say you are sommelier at a restaurant and one of these, not a millennial, a little older person has decided to go on their smartphone and find a wine from your wine list. And it turns out to be one of those higher end wines that's under Screwcap. And they ask for it, you bring it, you present the bottle, they see the Screwcap and they get that funny look on their face. How do you now present the bottle and deal with taking off the Screwcap and the whole romance? What would be your thing to do in that situation?
One thing that I'm going to try to do is get wine in that glass as quickly as possible,
right?
Because that often diffuses the entire situation. If you give them time at the table to see the Screwcap and then they think about it and they start to question it before the wine's even opened in their glass, it's much more difficult. But oftentimes I'll go over, present the bottle, and I'll keep the label facing towards them, but I'll put my hand over the entire closure and very subtly work the Screwcap off. I find if you actually grip below the actual part that screws off and twist, it's a lot less loud and it looks less like you're opening a Screwcap bottle. And then just kind of slip the Screwcap into my pocket and pour tastes of wine. And oftentimes people just assume that there's going to be a display of opening the bottle of wine. It's going to take a couple minutes. And people will kind of look up and like, well, wow, that was fast. And then wine's in their glass and they're distracted by the fact, oh, I got to taste this wine. And then once the wine is good, it seems to not even matter. I'll put the bottle down the table and they might look at the top and be like, oh, there's kind of that screw on there. That's interesting. But I find that getting wine into the glass quickly helps to allay a lot of those fears, because once they start to build up that prejudice, like, oh, it's a Screwcap wine, their mind starts spinning. What's the last Screwcap wine I had? Oh, I'm thinking about cheap stuff that I had when I was in college. And it spirals out of control. And again, the least amount of time I can give them to think about that and to get down that rabbit hole, then the better it is. And once the wine's in the glass and they start asking questions, that's great, because I can always point to the glass and say, just give it a try, just get the experience. And I'll talk about the winemakers. I will talk about the decisions that are made in the vineyard and really talk about how winemakers want to preserve all of that work that they've done and get the most precise and accurate representation of their vineyard and their efforts over the past, whatever that past vintage was, into the glass without any risk, any flaws. And I talk about all the decisions that they can make. And, this was a decision that was made by the winemaker. It was not made by bankers. It was not made by investors. It was made by that human being who is in charge of this wine. And as soon as you make it into a human proposition, someone out there working hard, I think people can relate to that. I think people can really understand, I spend all day at work and I want my work to be recognized for being the quality that it is. It gives it a little bit more of a personal flair. And I think people can then relate to it as opposed to it being a massive commercially produced wine, which a lot of people think that Screwcaps have to be associated with. So I think, again, trying to make it personal, trying to give them as many avenues to connect with the wine and the winemaker and the process brings that romance right back into it that might have been lost through a little unceremonious opening of the Screwcap.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on and talking about this.
Well, Joe, my pleasure. I could probably go on much longer than that, but it's a fascinating topic, and again, certainly it's something that's not closed, and I think it's a fun debate to have. I do recommend having it over a glass of wine, and seems to make things go a little bit better.
And I agree, the topic is not closed, and I saw what you did there.
Well, it's full of puns, intentional and unintentional, but have some fun when you can.
Awesome. Michael, thanks so much.
My pleasure, Jeff.
Thank you for listening to Wine Biz 360. Do you have a sales story, question, or want to be a guest on the show? Visit winebiz360.com and let us know.